Hopefully this is going to be a fairly short podcast. I want to start kind of dancing around Schopenhauer a little bit. And I've got a quote here from the very first section of the first book of The World as Will and Representation, just to illustrate a point. Now the title, The World as Will and Representation, well, I think we have some kind of handle on the representation bit because we've been looking at Kant. The only thing we know is representations. That's all we know. Obviously. If you're not convinced of that, just think about it a little bit. It's well understood that there's no such thing as green. Green is something our brain creates. In fact, colours are something our brain creates. And Kant would have it that space and time are also a framework created by our mind to perceive reality or to give us a representation of reality. There isn't space and time in reality, but our mind uses it to process reality. So that's the representation bit, but nothing has been said about the will bit, and this is Schopenhauer's special mix. The will bit is, well, it's kind of more shocking in a way. The representation bit, we can say, oh yeah, well, no such thing as colours or space and time, blah blah blah, but when it comes to the will, it gets very personal. Because what Schopenhauer is talking about here isn't something pretty. He quotes this quote from Aristotle: nature is not divine, but demon-like. And of course, we are a part of nature. And you would have to say that in the main, human behaviour is not divine, but very often demon-like. Schadenfreude, hatred, envy. Spinoza, asserted that envy is the default state for many people. Envy, hatred, jealousy, derision, fear. These are not the manifestations and inner state of something that is divine, or at least not in the way we normally think of it. Certainly the inner state of something that kind of looks demon-like, like the god of chaos, I think that is, on this in that picture. So Schopenhauer says something very interesting that's actually very shocking. So let me read it. So right near the end of section 1, book 1. This truth, which must be very serious and grave, if not terrible to everyone. So he's warning us that what he's about to say is something fairly shocking. Is that a man can also say and must say, the world is my will. Well, the world is your representation. The world you know is your representation. There's not much argument about that. But is this world, with all its cruelty and suffering and so on and so forth, a manifestation of your will? Well, this is where we get into Schopenhauer's notion that effectively there is only one will. We may all experience will being primarily the will to life. We all experience that, but each one of us believes that we are the only sentient thing on the planet. We see other people and we we kind of acknowledge them as being sentient, but this sense of my world is other people are really objects. And this is the horrible, cruel trick that the will plays upon all of us. That we all believe we are uniquely the center of the universe. Now, to go back to this quote, why is it terrible that we can say the world is my will? Well, it's terrible because what is manifesting through you and what becomes a representation for you is this will. So all the cruelty, all the suffering, all the barbarism, all the cheating, all the lying is a part of you. The heart of us is not something nice and pretty. The heart of us is this will that manifests through all things, and what is manifested through these things is the nature of this will at various levels of what you might call perfection. And Schopenhauer does kind of give a little bit of relief in the sense of saying that, well, and it's very like Spinoza's statement, the will manifests at different gradations. Some of it is just truly barbaric and cruel and evil, or what we would see as evil, and sometimes it's more refined, maybe through fine art or something like that. I don't entirely agree with his argument on that, but he's got the main point. It's very like Spinoza's of God had no shortage to produce all levels of perfection from hell to heaven. But when we look out into the world and we see the various things, the atrocities, the occasionally kindnesses, compassion, things like that, but very often cheating, lying, the usual bag of human behaviors. That world is your will. It's not something that is foreign to you. That is you. Possibly not in entirety. It depends on what kind of person you are, but to a large extent that world is you. We try to disown it because clearly we don't want to feel that inside ourselves is all this cruelty and all this me, and if I am stronger you become weaker, and if you become stronger I become weaker, therefore you must become weaker. All those kind of ideas and that processing that goes on within most of us. I assume most of the people listening to this have felt envy, schadenfreude, some kind of joy at someone else's misfortune, jealousy, somebody else having something you want, hatred, anger, fear. Of course we're all in fear because at the back of our minds is the ever-present threat of death. And this is what we are. We don't inherit these feelings and so on. We actually are those things. The world is your will. You can't disown it. And of course there will be moments when you felt some kind of finer emotion towards someone, but they're probably relatively rare compared with all the other stuff. Just raw lust, debauchery. Need I go on? So that one sentence in Schopenhauer is very important, and it leads. So the first book within the book. I mean, Schopenhauer calls them books. There are 4 books in the first book. Deals with representation. The second one deals with will. And he's not exactly complimentary about man, about our behaviour, about our ability to inflict cruelty, deliberate cruelty, which is relatively rare in the animal world. It does happen, but less so than with man. And as he says, man is demon to man. And the solution to this in Schopenhauer's world is to renounce the will, to renounce it. And as he points out, that's the central message in Christianity and also in Buddhism. But that's a dangerous route for many reasons. Anyway, I thought I'd, as I say, start dancing around a little bit of Schopenhauer. He paints a very realistic picture of life. Well, realistic in my opinion. The world doesn't want to know this stuff. You know, Schopenhauer is 200 and a bit years old, and it's still a minority interest and probably always will be, and yet there are great truths in there. Anyway, it might be useful actually if you get time to read the first few sections in the first book of The World is Will and Representation, because I'll be spending a bit of time on them in the coming week or two.